Most people who struggle in relationships believe the problem is circumstantial. The wrong timing, the wrong people, a run of bad luck. What they almost never consider is that the way they do relationships, the specific, habitual, deeply grooved manner in which they approach closeness, might itself be the thing producing the outcomes they keep experiencing, not because they are choosing to sabotage themselves, but because the relational style they've developed operates largely beneath awareness, following patterns built long before they had the language or perspective to examine them. And relational styles, unlike conscious choices, don't respond to willpower or good intentions. They respond to understanding, to the moment when a person finally sees not what they're doing wrong, but why they developed the approach they did, and what it was originally built to protect. At the center of most adult relationship struggles is something that developmental psychologists call attachment style, the foundational orientation toward intimacy that each person develops through early caregiving experiences. John Bowlby's research established that the first attachment bonds in a person's life become the template for all subsequent close relationships, not through a rigid determinism, but through the brain's tendency to generalize. The emotional logic of early connection becomes the emotional logic of all connection, operating automatically in every significant relationship that follows. Mary Ainsworth's subsequent research identified 3 primary insecure attachment patterns. And the most important thing to understand about them is this: no one chooses their attachment style any more than they choose their native language. It is the emotional vocabulary you were handed before you knew there were other languages available. And like any language learned before conscious memory, it runs fluidly and invisibly, organizing experience in ways that feel like reality rather than interpretation. The anxious attachment style is organized around the threat of abandonment. Picture a relational history in which care was available, genuinely available, but inconsistent, sometimes fully present, sometimes not, sometimes warm, sometimes distant. The person receiving that care could never quite predict which version would arrive, and so the attachment system, which exists specifically to maintain proximity to caregivers, was kept at perpetual heightened alert. In adulthood, this produces a relational style characterized by deep hunger for closeness alongside an equally deep anxiety about whether that closeness will hold. The anxiously attached person loves with urgency. They need reassurance with a frequency that often surprises even them. They interpret normal fluctuations in a partner's availability as signals that something is wrong, that the relationship is at risk, that they need to do something immediately to close the gap, and the specific, invisible way this sabotages relationships is through the behavior it produces: the checking, the seeking, the volume of need. A partner who begins to experience the relationship as a source of relentless demand gradually starts protecting themselves, pulling back slightly, becoming less available, which produces precisely the confirmation the anxious person most feared and most fueled with their behavior. If this is landing somewhere in you, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people find conversations like this one. And if understanding the attachment science behind why relationships keep playing out the way they do is something you want more of, subscribing makes that work possible. The avoidant attachment style is organized around the threat of engulfment. Picture a relational history in which dependence was costly, in which expressing need reliably produced disappointment or intrusion or an emotional demand from the caregiver that the child was not equipped to meet. The self-protective adaptation is self-sufficiency, learning to manage independently, to need less, to maintain an emotional buffer between the self and other people that keeps the relationship from ever reaching the level of intimacy where past pain became possible. In adulthood, the avoidantly attached person is often the partner who seems emotionally contained, who needs significant alone time, who pulls back instinctively when a relationship reaches a new level of depth, who can be genuinely caring and yet consistently unavailable at the moments when closeness is most needed. The sabotage mechanism here is the distance itself, not chosen consciously, but produced automatically by a nervous system that learned to treat intimacy as a threat. The partner on the receiving end of the avoidant pattern experiences warmth at a removed connection that feels real but never quite full, closeness that approaches and then recedes. And they either intensify their pursuit, which activates the avoidant person's need for more space, or they begin to withdraw, which produces in the avoidant person a sudden, paradoxical re-engagement that resets the cycle. The disorganized attachment style is the most complex and the least often named, because it doesn't follow a consistent logic. It emerges from relational histories, in which the attachment figure was simultaneously a source of comfort and a source of fear. This creates an impossible bind. The system designed to seek the caregiver as refuge learns that the caregiver is also the threat, producing a relational orientation without a coherent strategy. In adulthood, disorganized attachment looks like wanting closeness desperately and being terrified of it simultaneously. It looks like moving toward someone and retreating, sometimes in the same conversation. It looks like the experience of being inexplicably flooded by emotion in relational contexts, without being able to understand why. And here is the paradox that holds all three of these styles, and the relational suffering they produce in a single, clarifying frame. The very behavior that most damages the relationship is the behavior that attachment history made most automatic. The anxious person's pursuit pushes away the partner they most need to keep close. The avoidant person's distance creates the abandonment they learn to manage alone. The disorganized person's oscillation produces exactly the instability they have always known. Each person is, in the language of their original attachment system, trying to get their needs met. And in the language of adult relationships, the strategy keeps failing. This is not a weakness. It is not a failure of character. It is the specific, precise consequence of learning to survive one relational environment and then entering a different one with the same tools. The tools were appropriate, the environment changed. And the adaptation that protected you in the original context now produces, in the current one, the outcomes you most wanted to avoid. What changes this is not a simple decision to behave differently. The attachment system is not a conscious choice. It cannot be revised by willpower. What changes it is something more specific and more patient. Repeated experience of something genuinely different from what the original pattern predicted. A relationship in which the anxious person's need for reassurance is met consistently until the nervous system begins to update its model of what availability looks like. A relationship in which the avoidant person's need for space is honored without withdrawal until the nervous system begins to update its model of what closeness costs. This kind of updating is slow and non-linear and requires, from both people, a generosity that can only come from understanding what is actually happening, and it begins with the moment of recognition, the moment when the pattern becomes visible, not as a flaw, not as a verdict on your capacity for love, but as a map, the precise account of where you learned to do this, what it was protecting, and what it no longer needs to protect you from now. Your relationship style is not who you are. It is what you learned. And what was learned can, with patience and the right conditions, be slowly, incrementally, meaningfully unlearned. Which relational pattern do you recognize most in yourself, and do you know where it was built? If this opens your eyes, hit the like button and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.